Welcome to unit number 4 of our series, Finding God Through Faith and Reason. Once again, please remember that this series might be useful to people you know who might be struggling with their faith, a child or a friend or someone with whom you might be acquainted. And so the series might be very useful to them as well, and it will be made available at the end of the series on videotape. There's also a book written by myself called New Proofs for the Existence of God. And there is also a recourse that can be made to the Institute on Faith and Reason at Gonzaga University. What we want to do right now, we're continuing our series on the metaphysical proof right now. The main thing to remember in the last episode is we hypothesized, well, maybe there's not an unconditioned reality. That is to say, maybe there isn't a reality which is not dependent upon anything for its existence in all reality. So we hypothesized that there wasn't an unconditioned reality, but we saw that the two consequences of that couldn't be the case. Because the minute you say that there is no unconditioned reality in all reality, then everything in all reality would have to be a conditioned reality. And if everything is conditioned, then it's dependent upon conditions for its existence. Now, it could either be dependent upon a finite number of conditions or an infinite number of conditions. We saw that if it was dependent upon a finite number of conditions, that would mean a last or terminating condition, and that last or terminating condition would have to be one whose conditions would not be fulfilled because it was last and it was conditioned. Therefore, that last or terminating condition whose conditions were not fulfilled would have to be zero, and everything dependent upon it would have to be zero. Alternatively, we also saw that you could postulate an infinite number of conditions, one that was not terminating. But we saw that if you said that the cat was dependent upon an infinite number of conditions, then that would mean it would be an unachievable number of conditions, because an infinite number of conditions can never terminate. It can never end. So it'd always have to be more than could ever be achieved. And so you'd have to say that the cat was dependent upon an unachievable number of conditions being fulfilled, which by definition, if it's unachievable, can't be fulfilled, in which case the cat would be nothing. So we noticed that our only two options that we had for postulating that there are only conditioned realities, that there is no unconditioned reality in all reality, were both false, because it would necessarily entail that no conditioned existent could exist under such a hypothesis. The cat can't exist with a finite number of conditioned realities only. The cat can't exist if there's an infinite number of conditions. Therefore, of course, you have to say that there has to be at least one unconditioned reality in all reality in order to get started, in order for there to be at least one starting condition which can then fulfill the conditions of every other condition in reality, including the cat. Now, of course, one of our most popular options is to hear about the old circular hypothesis. And of course, many people say, well, wait a minute, you've arranged everything linearly, but what would happen if there was a circularity of causes? In other words, you had conditioned reality number 1, as you can see from your diagram, which is dependent upon conditioned reality number 2, which is dependent upon conditioned reality number 3, which in turn, once again, is dependent upon conditioned reality number 1. So therefore, all you have are 3 conditioned realities, but since they're dependent upon one another, of course, it would mean that we don't have to have these two options that you just talked about. We don't have to worry about then having an infinite number versus a finite number. The circle answers the question. Not really. And here's why. First of all, you'll get a clue from St. Thomas Aquinas' uncause-cause argument. You see, conditioned reality number 1 in the circle, it would be 0 without conditioned reality number 3. And you see, conditioned reality number 2 in the circle, it would be 0 without conditioned reality number 1. And conditioned reality number 2 in the circle, it would be, reality number 3 in the circle would be 0 without conditioned reality number 2. And so you see, none of them ever comes into being. And the circle of conditioned realities never comes into being because A is number 1 is 0 without number 3. Number 2 is 0 without number 1. Number 3 is 0 without number 2. They're all 0. But there's an easy way of showing that. So if any time in the future your friend comes up and says to you, oh, the circle works, just say, oh, I know, I'm just ignorant. Just answer me this one question. Can you tell me if your circle really implies not an infinite? We know there's a finite. You've only postulated 3 conditioned realities. I'm not interested in how many conditioned realities there are. I'm much more interested in how many conditions there are inside the circle. So, how many conditions are you postulating? An infinite number, because the circle just keeps going independent back and back and back and back infinitely. So there's really, those 3 conditioned realities really represent an infinite number of conditions? Or are you really saying that there are a finite number of conditions in the circle? In other words, we go back in the circle 10 times and we stop at conditioned reality number 2. But it terminates, it stops. What are you really telling me? Are you telling me we got a finite number or an infinite number of conditions, even though you've postulated only 3 conditioned realities? What are you telling me? And of course, let's suppose your friend says, well, I'm picking a finite number of conditions. It goes through the circle 10 times, but stops at conditioned reality number 2. Then great, conditioned reality number 2, once it stops, what is that immediately? That means immediately you've got conditioned reality number 2, which is a final or last terminating condition, hypothesis F, whose conditions are not fulfilled, because you said that was the last condition. It's the terminating condition. It doesn't go back in the circle anymore. So conditioned reality number 2, after the 10th time through the circle, that was the final one. Then it is the final one, and it is a last condition whose conditions are not fulfilled, in which case it's 0. And then everything dependent upon it, namely conditioned reality number 1, and conditioned reality number 3, back to conditioned reality number 2, are all 0, 0, 0. And as my old metaphysics teacher in Germany once told me, it simply blows up. It all blows up. In other words, what we are dealing with then is we are dealing with a series of conditioned realities. Yeah, there's only a finite number of them, but you postulated a finite number of conditions, and the finite number of conditions has a terminating condition, and that terminating condition must be a conditioned reality, in which case its conditions are not fulfilled, in which case it's 0 and the whole circle is 0. But then again, you could turn right around and say, no, I didn't really mean that. I meant it goes back infinitely. The circle never ends. It's just conditioned reality depending upon, the next condition, previous one, and it goes back infinitely, and it never, ever, ever ends. In that case, you never get to the end of your conditions, in which case you have an unachievable number of conditions. And postulating the circle, even though you only have 3 conditioned realities in the circle, what you really did is you postulated an infinite dependency. You said there was an infinite number of conditions because this one was dependent upon this one, which is dependent upon this one, ad infinitum. In which case, conditioned reality number 1 is dependent upon an infinite number of conditions being fulfilled, and it's 0, because if it depends upon an unachievable number of conditions being fulfilled, it will never be fulfilled. And conditioned reality number 2 is dependent upon an infinite or an unachievable number of conditions being fulfilled, in which case it's 0, because that will never be fulfilled. And conditioned reality number 3 is dependent upon an infinite number of conditions being fulfilled, and it's 0. And of course, just like my old metaphysics teacher said, it all blows up. It simply blows up. A circle doesn't save us at all from an infinite number of conditions. It doesn't save us at all from a finite number of conditions having a terminating condition whose last condition must be 0 because it is a conditioned reality whose conditions are not fulfilled. You can't get out of it. And therefore, circle or no circle, if you postulate that there is no unconditioned reality in all reality, then no conditioned reality, no cat, no molecule, no atom, no proton, no quark, no conditioned reality of any kind can exist in all reality, in which case, fundamentally, what you have